put the Christmas music on this time.
No.
Welcome back to episode 207 of Tall Boy Radio. And if you wanted to find a show that spent its Christmas in the top 100 of the Cambodian podcast charts, you're in the right place, my friends. So without further ado, let's introduce our two irregulars. Gaza?
Yeah, evening all, evening the world. Really looking forward to this. Feels great to be back at the sort of regular time slot sort of recording. I'll give a little bit of a hint to what we have coming up, because for our guest, there was only really one T-shirt I could wear for our favourite Floridian-based New Yorker, but that's a little bit of a clue as to who we might have. But I'll hand over to Dave before Beans, you can introduce the legend that is.
Indeed, indeed. Dave?
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I don't know if he's an ex-DT or a current EDP. I don't know, one of those two.
A little of both.
There you go. So, as you heard the old dulcet accent there, guys, if you want to hold the book up, this is his latest book that he's been writing. We're going to say hello to one of our favourite guests. I don't want to be dismissive of some of the other folks that we've had on there. Vic Ferrari, how you doing?
Beans, Gaz, David, thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's an absolute honour, isn't it, Gaza, to have you back on?
It is, and some of the tales that we recall from sort of the previous couple of times that Vic's been on rank up there with some of our favourite stories and our favourite sort of memories of sort of starting out podcasting. And obviously it's a while ago now, but absolutely delighted to have him back on, and can't wait to see where this one goes.
Indeed. And probably before we get to talking about your book, Vic, probably worth mentioning the fact you're now also a podcast host yourself.
I am. I started my friends kept busting my balls about, you got these books. You should really start up a podcast and bring on retired NYPD guys and tell NYPD stories. So I did. I started my own podcast, and it's named after my book, and it's got the same artwork because I'm cheap and I wasn't going to get new artwork. It's called NYPD Through the Looking Glass Podcast, and it's on YouTube, Spotify, Buzzsprout. You guys know it. Anywhere you can find a podcast, it is.
Yeah, and I can't help but notice it's doing very, very well, as we were just chatting about there at the start. So, do you ever check out a website called Listen Notes?
No, but I will now.
Yeah, if you check it out on there, dude, you will search your podcast in there, and it will tell you that it's in the top 5% of podcasts globally.
Mine?
Yeah, yours.
Hell yeah, Vic. Look what you started now. Look what you started.
Genie's out of the bottle, boys. There's no putting it back in.
Yeah, honestly, it's a good website for checking those sort of stuff out. And if you want to check us out, well, we're only top 10%.
We're only top 10, yeah. But we'll take top 10.
Yeah, we'll take top 10. Yeah,
Absolutely.
you drop us a message when you're in the Cambodian podcast charts.
I'll send down a ladder. Cambodian charts.
Yeah, we were quite surprised by that. I'm not going to lie. We peaked at number 48 in the Cambodian podcast charts.
Peaked at number 48, and we were a little bit surprised at country number 62, which was Cambodia. So whoever is listening in Cambodia, we thank you very much, and we hope that it long continues.
Indeed. So do you want to tell us then about your latest book, Laughing in the Line of Duty?
Yeah, I mean, like my other books, it's just loaded with short and funny stories from my days at the New York City Police Department. It's funny, when I was finishing up the book, this is like late September, I was putting the book together and getting the stories together and stuff. I had to go for another colonoscopy. So at 57 years old, you're supposed to go every 5-10 years. So I make the appointment. If anyone's ever gone for a colonoscopy before, it sucks. You got to do the prep the day before. You got to drink all this stuff. You can't be you have to be within 5 feet of a bathroom, or all hell is going to break loose. You got to get up first thing in the morning and go to a clinic. I will not do a colon. I've never had anesthesia in my life, so I do any procedure awake. So I go in and they're like, all right, meet the anesthesiologist. I said, nope. Get the fuck out of here. I'm not doing it. I'm doing it awake. And they're like, are you sure? I said, yeah, I'm going to do it awake. So they wheel me in and everyone's talking to me. And all the nurses are coming in now because they want to see this idiot that's doing this colonoscopy procedure awake. So I'm laying on my side and the snake charmer is running this cable up my ass. And we're just talking. And I'm looking on, there's a big like flat screen TV on the wall. And I'm looking at my colon in high def. And he goes all the way up there and he goes, all right, you're good. And then they come back out. The only problem with a colonoscopy is when you're awake, your sigmoid colon is like a cul-de-sac. So on the way out, he's kind of, it's like driving a car, actually. He's kind of got to like back out. And when he does it, I mean, that fucking hurts. So anyway, pulls the cable out of my ass. I'm fine. So they're wheeling me into a recovery room. Well, it's not really a room. It's like a big, I guess it is a room, but it's got like the curtains where there's other people and you hear people farting and moaning and stuff. I'm the only person in there that hasn't had anesthesia. So I'm busting the nurse's balls. I was like, can I go? And she's like, we just got to check your vitals for about 5-10 minutes. Then you can go. I said, all right. So I'm sitting there and I'm talking to her about the New York City Police Department. And like 2 cubicles over, I hear a faint voice and I hear, what's your tax number? What? What's your tax number? And the nurse is looking at me like, and I go, were you on the job? And he goes, yeah. I go, well, where did you work? And he's telling me precincts in New York City. So he keeps asking for my tax number. So tax number, unlike a police shield, which kind of gets recycled, you know, you get promoted, your shield number goes to someone else. In the New York City Police Department, everybody has a 6-digit tax number that follows you through the rest of your career, and it dies with you. When you step off, you get fired or retired. Anyway, so he's asking for my tax number. So I yell it out, and he goes, oh, you're an old timer. I go, old timer? What the fuck is he talking? Old timer? I'm 57 years old. I'm in the prime of my life, right? So after I'm able to go, I turn to the nurse, and I said, can I just go back there and see who the hell this is? She goes, yeah, go ahead. So I go back there, and this younger guy, he's probably in his late 30s, early 40s. And I'm talking to him, and he left the NYPD early to start up a business down here in Florida. But he's coming out of anesthesia, so he's like in a fog. So we're going back and forth. He's telling me where he lived and everything. I says, all right, man, I got to go. My girlfriend's waiting for me. He goes, all right, take care. And I go, and this never happened. And I walked out, and the nurse goes, oh, you're so bad. She goes, I have to tell him that you know, that he really did have this conversation with you. So I was busting his balls on the way out the door.
Well, fair play to you for taking one for the team there like that without
absolutely.
the anesthesia. I've never had it done, but if I have it done, I'm taking the anesthesia.
100%.
I don't care.
Yeah. I don't care.
I went for the other end. I went for an endoscopy once, and it was very similar. As they said, do you want to be sedated? And I said, well, you know, what does that mean? Well, you won't be able to drive for an hour or something after. So I said, no, it'll be fine. I got an absolute awful gag reflex. I hate even going to the dentist anywhere around there. But I thought, no, it'll be fine. How bad could it be? Worst thing of my life. So same as you, but you're watching on a camera and you're watching it go down, and it is absolutely horrendous. And then, but fortunately, when they pull that out, they do just whip it out, and they haven't got the cul-de-sac to go around. But yeah, but at least you could walk out.
I did an endoscopy awake too, and they give you a little Dixie cup. So you ever go to the dentist before they put a needle in your mouth, they rub that crap on your gum?
Yeah.
They give you a Dixie cup of that stuff, and they tell you to swallow it. And then you're laying on your side, and they take that cable and that ball that hangs in your throat. I can't think of the name of it. They're tapping it. And he goes, all right, Vic, on 3, swallow. And I'm just looking at him. He goes, you got to trust me. And he's like, 1, 2. And I'm like, nope. And it's like the trap in the toilet. He pops that shit open. And like Dave said, you're looking at your stomach. You're coming from the top. And he's just like, okay. And with me, he goes, oh, you just have a slight hiatal hernia. But what happens is on the way out with that cable, that lidocaine only lasts for about 5 minutes, and it starts wearing off. And you're like, all of a sudden you sound like you got Tourette's. So you got a cable down your throat, and you're laying to the side, and you're going, and he's like, Vic, I'm telling you now. He goes, I don't want to whip this thing out. He goes, you got to really you got to trust me and breathe through your nose. Don't try to breathe through your mouth. And I just kind of nodded because you can't talk. And I just kind of nodded. But like Dave said, yeah, the endoscopy was just as bad as the colonoscopy awake.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I've also had an endoscopy, and I thought, same as Dave, I thought, yeah, I'm driving home. I don't want to be messing around here. But I'll tell you after that, if I ever have one of those things again, you ever seen Pulp Fiction? Ving Rhames and that, like, you know what I mean? Bring out the gimp. Those were the kind of noises I was making lying there on my side.
Brilliant. Fortunately, I've had neither of those two procedures, and you're not really painting a pretty picture, so long may it continue, fingers crossed.
Yeah, apologies to anybody who's eating their dinner while they're listening to this podcast.
Or are going for a procedure tomorrow.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Trust in the medical profession. They know what they're doing.
Exactly. Speaking of which, we'll say hello to Stuart Willis. Nicely timed there, dude.
Do you see what I did there?
I do. So, one of the things I saw you say on your social media as well, taking you back to the book and away from your colon, is the artwork, dude. So I saw it like when it was in pre-production. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the artwork on your books and how you get them done, just out of interest?
Yeah, I work with this company called ebooklaunch.com, and they're in Canada. It's a very reputable company, and they're, for someone that's going to like put out their own book, a self-published author, they're great because a lot of companies will want money up front, like $5,000-$10,000, and they tell you, don't worry, we're going to do everything. What Ebook Launch does is it's a la carte, so you pay for things as you go, and they guarantee their work. So with my book covers, what you do is you fill out an online form. They want to know the title. They want to know what the book's about, the genre. So my book is true crime and comedy. So they're going to know it's kind of lighthearted. And you just spell out what you want. So with this book cover, what I told them is I want a young cop, and I sent them photos of what an NYPD patrolman's uniform looked like. I sent them photos of what a supervisor's uniform would look like with the white shirt. And I says, I want a cop standing behind a barrier at a parade with nothing really going on in the background, and the supervisor screaming in his face with a bullhorn. And they just knock it out of the park. So what they do is they'll draw a sketch, and then after you approve or disapprove the sketch, and then they do the artwork, and they do a fantastic job. If you're going to make your book available for ebook and paperback, it's about $500, because what they do is on the back of the book, then you write a book blurb, and then you write about the author section, then you provide a photo of yourself. So they do that. So the front would just work for ebook form, but for paperback, they need, a back of the back jacket. So for both, it's about $500 US dollars.
Oh, fair play.
Who's this good-looking fellow on the back as well? A much younger and slightly less grey version of the one that we're talking to at the moment. I think, look at that bad boy there.
That's not too long ago. I think I took that photo when I first met you guys about a year ago.
Oh, okay. I'll take you back then.
Yeah,
it just depends on how much product I put in my hair.
We have that effect on people, yeah.
If I put a lot of product in my hair, I'm not as grey.
Is that what it is? You trying to get rid of the grey now? Yeah, okay, I get it.
Cool. So how are you finding doing the podcast as well then? You know, I mean, it's I always find it's an interesting experience. And like I say, when we get to chat to people like your good self, it's, it's a breath of fresh air. And we got to speak to so many people that otherwise we would never have met in real life. So I think that's for me is one of the best things to come out of doing the podcast. How have you been finding it?
Well, for someone that worked in law enforcement, it's challenging because most cops and people in law enforcement, when they're done and they walk away from their careers, unless they're doing something that they need to promote, they're only going to tell these stories amongst their friends.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult because I've reached out to guys because my idea was I'm going to reach out. The New York City Police Department's got hundreds of specialized units. And I was like, I'll bring on a guy from the bomb squad. I'll bring a guy on from the mounted unit. I'll bring a guy on from emergency service. And I reach out to these guys and, especially with friends, like close friends, your friends. If you ask once and they don't bite, you're going to be a pain in the ass if you keep asking them. So I'll ask once, and if I kind of get met with cold water, then I leave it alone. I've reached out to friends of friends. It's difficult for me to get guests, although I have brought someone that were really interesting. I had a guy on that used to work in the transit unit. He had fascinating stories about people committing suicide, touching the third rail in the train and blowing up, and people getting pinned between the subway car and the platform. They call it a space case. So they're stuck and basically crushed, but they're alive. The only thing keeping them alive is the pressure between the platform and the train. And then what they do is they put like these super airbags in there to push the train a little bit away from the platform, and the person just bleeds out.
Wow.
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 Sounds cheery, Vic.
It's real life. So what I've been doing now is when I can't get a guest, I'll pick a story or a topic from one of my books, and I'll just roll with that for 20 minutes or a half hour, 45 minutes, as much as I can bloviate about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, because obviously, in your books, you mention certain stories and certain environments and certain crimes. And I just wondered how that transcended into doing the podcast in terms of the people and particularly the crooks and the criminals that you mention in the books. How far do you reach out into? And you've mentioned this one guy already, sort of off camera, that you've been in touch with and stuff. But do you have anybody that you've written about in a book that might either have served time and has now been, let's just say, rehabilitated, if that's even the right word, that you've then thought about perhaps trying to contact them to get them on to talk about the story? Is there anybody that you might have arrested that, has been rehabilitated that you can get on and talk about? Is that somewhere you could go?
I haven't kept in touch with any of my former clients. And when I call clients, people that I've arrested. Yeah. I'm down in Florida, they're in New York. And, that's a slippery slope because you don't know if they're rehabilitated. You don't know their motivation or their, what they may have in store for you.
Yeah.
What we were talking about off camera, and I can bring up his name, Matt Cox, who's defrauded banks and financial institutions out of $25 million. I didn't arrest him, but we happened to run into each other, and I was on his podcast and then he was on mine, and it worked out well. But no, I really haven't kept in touch with any of the people that I arrested. A lot of them, the ones that I arrested, I don't really think turned their lives around, unfortunately.
Right. Oh, okay.
Shame. Yeah, it's a shame. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this Matt Cox guy then? We chatted a little bit at the start now. So obviously, like you say, he has a podcast, which is really quite successful, and he has an eye for social media as well, as you were telling us. Did you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with him?
Yeah, I knew who he was. What he did was in about 2005, 2006, somewhere around there, he had defrauded banks and mortgage lenders out of $25 million. And he was a genius as far as creating phony identities. And what he did was, when he knew the walls were closing in on him, he went on the run for 3 years. He was like the second version of Catch Me If You Can. Yeah. And he had multiple identities, driver's licenses, credit histories of different people. And he moved around the United States. Matter of fact, he had a passport and came and went, left the United States several times. And he was on the U.S. Marshals and the Secret Service most wanted list, and eventually got caught. And well, one of the funny stories is he told me was when he was on the run and he was running out of IDs, he would pose. He would go to like homeless shelters and pose that he was working for the Red Cross and get homeless people's information, their social securities, their date of birth. And then what he would do is go online, look them up. And sometimes he had cash. He had a lot of money. It wasn't the money. It was the identities for driver's license stuff. He would pay off their debt. And then, it's like, say a guy had a suspended driver's license for failure to pay child support. He'd pay it. And then get the guy's license reinstated, assume his identity, and just move on. So he was sentenced to 25 or 26 years in jail. It was appealed. He got out after 13. And from what I see, he's turned his life around. He's very savvy with social media. He learned it. And I think his podcast is called Inside True Crime with Matt Cox. And it's fascinating. He brings on a lot of guys he was in federal prison with. And federal prison's a lot different in the United States than state prison. Federal prison, they can send you anywhere in the country. So if you're a bank robber in Tampa, Florida, you could be serving your time in Texas or California. So when the feds get you, no one's going to come visit you, right? Maybe you'll get visitors once or twice a year. And these prisons are in the middle of nowhere. So there's not like a Motel 6 around the block for your family to stay. And it's an all-day adventure to get into the facility and to leave. So, he had a rough time of it. He got out. It appears to me that he's turned his life around. And he just makes a fascinating, just his stories. We were just talking about, like, I was always fascinated with how Con Air worked. We saw the movie Con Air. I've read stories and books about prisoners that have traveled throughout the federal system because, say, for argument's sake, you're housed in Texas. and you're appealing a case or you're a witness in a case in New York City. They put you on a plane in Oklahoma, fly you to Philadelphia, and then from there you go in a van with other prisoners, and they just move you around like you're like an Amazon package. Really, you're a person, but you're getting moved around the country, and it takes days. So I was always fascinated on how that worked, and he's an interesting guy.
Yeah.
I just had when we sort of talking off just before we sort of started. You have a quick look on YouTube and you type his name in and it comes up all over the place. Like Matt Cox, just like true crime and real crime, and just having a quick look on the socials. And as you said, Vicky, he is all over the place, and you can't miss him pretty much from what I could see. So that's definitely somebody that we'll be looking at potentially. And if he's out there and he fancies coming on to a 2Bob 10-bit podcast, then and we're more than happy to have him.
I'll make the introduction.
Yeah, and just tell him if he wants to, if he wants to pay off a few of my debts, he could have my identity. It's not a problem.
The thing about him is, and you'll find this out very quickly. Like he goes into his life story when he was young. He's dyslexic, and he had a learning disability, and a lot of people wrote him off. They thought he was stupid or dumb, but he went to college. He was an art major, and that aided him immensely with forging documents. Yeah. As far as laminating things and using an X-Acto knife to, change a date of birth. And you talk to him, and I asked him, I go, have you ever had your IQ checked, or you ever take an IQ test? And he goes, why would you ask that? I said, because for someone that got written off, I says, you kind of, the things you got involved, someone who's not intelligent could not have gotten away with what you've gotten away with as long as you got away, So he goes, no, I never have. So I said, I would look into that if I were you.
Yeah. Because, it's, obviously, I would suspect that in America it's the same as here. You can't really go on the run for 3 years evading capture without really knowing what you're doing and without really understanding the ways and means of as how perhaps the cops work and researching how you can stay that one step ahead. So it doesn't sound like somebody that's potentially sort of not clued in, as they say. So it'd just be interesting just to chat to him. And is he quite open about his sort of previous sort of life and what he did and the crime and all of that? Yeah, and he's quite open about that and the fact of what he did and talks about how that's affected him, I suppose. That'd be quite interesting.
From his perspective, he was a legit guy working, processing loans. And a couple of times there were people that were trying to get a loan and it was close. And his supervisor told him, well, just do this and this, and the loan will go through. And just do this and this. And he kept stretching it. And then he realized, wait a minute, I can do this, this, and this. Matter of fact, I can open up loans under other people, and flip houses. And then it just took off. And then he was so good at it and so prolific at it that it just kind of took over his life until he got the heads up that the cops were coming for him. I don't want to blow it because he's got a really interesting, I don't want to tell his story, but what was fascinating for me is I said, weren't you nervous on the run? And he goes, no. He says, because if anyone stopped me, my license would come back just fine. Yeah. He says, it's not like I had a phony license. He goes, I had a license, with the state of New Mexico, the state of North Carolina. It was good if you run it. It just wasn't me on there. And he said at one point, there's a great story that he almost got caught, I think in South Carolina, and he was in a bank and something tripped. He screwed up. The cops come and he says, well, put me on the phone with the bank. And because he knows what he's doing. He's got the guy at the bank who's calling the cops to have him arrested, like second guessing himself now. Like maybe did we screw up? So the cop said, listen, what we need you to do is follow us to the police station. He goes, okay. So he's following the cops and he's like, do I take off? He says, if I take off, then they're going to know. He says, so I got to roll the dice. He goes into the police station and he says he's walking down the hallway and he spots his picture on the wall. And he's like, oh shit. He goes, and it was a color photo. He goes, everything else was like black and white, like the old ones. He goes, you know your face. He goes, I spotted it. And I go, oh shit. And then from there, I think he said he had a couple of plastic surgeries. So he's just an interesting guy.
Yeah. He sounds like he's had a very colourful and fulfilled life, I suppose, if that's the right phrase.
Yeah, amen. Just out of interest then, taking it back to the old police department days, Is any of your other colleagues that you used to work with back then, are they doing any podcasts or books or anything like that?
No, the retired ones, it's funny. A lot of cops, when they retire, I know from New York, they'll take security jobs. So they'll be bodyguards, they'll chauffeur rich people. Some of them will work like director of security. I got one friend that owns his own private security company. I have another friend that runs hospital security for a medical group. They tend to go to that. Then you get other guys, they're driving a school bus. Yeah. It's just they want nothing to do with law enforcement. They're done. They don't, it's the furthest thing from their mind.
Vic, do you have in the NYPD? Do you have to retire at a certain age or after a certain length of service?
62 years old.
Okay, so you could still be active then because you're not that old yet.
Sure. Had I hung around, I'd have 5 years to go.
Yeah. Any little bit of you that wishes that you would have done?
Oh yeah, I mean, I still have dreams. It's like I don't have nightmares, but the one reoccurring dream that I have quite often is, should I retire? I'm still at work, and should I hang around another year? Should I hang around another 2 years? Should I make more overtime? Should I do this? Should I do that? And then I wake up like, what should I do? And then I'm like, well, I did it already. I've been retired 16 years, but some guys stay. Everybody's situation is different. For me, I wasn't married. I had no kids. I wasn't in debt. I planned for it. I planned to get out at 20. And I'm glad I did. But yeah, part of me, I mean, I miss the action. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I don't miss, the job has changed so much. The world has changed so much since I retired. It would probably be very difficult for me to survive in that environment now because they really don't let cops do their jobs anymore.
Yeah. And I suppose in a way, and the world does change, and you can talk to various people that do various different professions and say, oh, it's not like it was years ago, and the world's changed, and there's too much red tape now, and you can't just go and police, and you can't give somebody a quick slap or backhand just to get them to talk or whatever, because you've got paperwork to fill, and you've got this to do, and it's like, part you must be a bit saddened by that. Just think, just let cops be cops, and let them solve crimes, and let them just do the job that they wanted to do, rather than just be sort of bound by all the red tape and bureaucracy and this, that, and the other. So it must be quite frustrating.
It is, but it's every generation goes through the same thing. So I got hired in 1987, and there are a lot of old timers from the Vietnam era. There were guys that were like hired in the late 1950s, and they would tell stories like, and I couldn't believe it, but it was true. Back in the old days, I mean, not 20, 30 years before I got hired, you could shoot at a fleeing felon. Yeah. So if someone came up to you and said, that guy robbed me and he's running down the street, you could pop shots at him. Now, I mean, by the time I got hired, that was a big no-no. I mean, they had to be pointing a gun at you for you to do that. But, and those guys were complaining. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, and then, everything comes full circle. Here I am, 2007, the world is changing. My office was changing. Politics was changing. In the police department, I said, I'd rather get out a year early than a year late. Yeah. So I just said, that's it. I'm just going to step down.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So what was life like then in New York City back then? Not necessarily in the police department, but just living in New York City. What was that like?
Well, talking about full circle. So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx. My neighborhood was a rough neighborhood. You had, it was a working class neighborhood, hardworking people, and people there were tough. I'm not going to say I was tough, but I mean, there were a lot of construction workers and people that work with their hands. And my neighborhood kind of policed itself. People really didn't call the cops for many things in my neighborhood. I mean, in my neighborhood, if you were trying to scam someone or screw around with some guy's sister, someone was going to come up to you with an Abraham Lincoln mask and a baseball bat and give you a crack. You know what I mean? Like the cops would come afterwards and just kind of clean up the mess. But the rest of New York City, like you had different neighborhoods that kind of police themselves. But New York City was a mess when I was a kid. Crime was through the roof. And I got hired, and then here comes the crack epidemic. So crime was out of control, and here comes crack cocaine, which is now turning poor people into zombies, right? And they're selling their bodies and doing all these terrible crimes to keep this high going. And New York, it went in a cycle. I got hired. We had Ed Koch was the mayor. Wasn't a bad guy, but was very soft on crime. He liked the police, but he was soft on crime. Then we had the late, great David Dinkins. He's kind of like the guy that's running the city now. He doesn't know what he's doing, and crime went out of control. And, you know, most of the time in New York, people vote Democratic, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and that's how Rudy Giuliani came in, because Rudy was riding this high. He was a federal prosecutor. He had figured out through the RICO statutes how to take down the mafia. Rudy was in the paper every other day. He did the commission case, the Windows case, the Pizza Connection case. It just goes on and on and on. He basically just decimated the mafia. So people said, you know what, give this guy a chance. He's a crime fighter. And he did. I mean, he brought down crime. And then we got Mike Bloomberg, who is a progressive, but Bloomberg was smart enough to realize if you keep crime down, people are going to continue to come to the city. They're going to come to Broadway shows. They're going to travel. He was also a genius with bond ratings. So he kept New York City solvent, but then he had to step down, and now it's kind of descended into chaos after two different mayors.
Yeah. Well, Stuart's asked a question, and I think you've answered it before on the podcast, but obviously we can answer it again for Stuart if you like. Stuart wants to know, did you ever come across the mafia at all?
Sure. Growing up in my neighborhood, it was present. My dad worked in a a wholesale meat place that was controlled by the mafia. And then later on in the last 10 years of my career, I worked in organized crime. So yeah, we did cases on the mafia because the mafia made a lot of money off of the chop shops.
Yeah. And I know it goes underground, and they probably make their money through a lot of legitimate sources as well now. Might not necessarily pay a lot of tax on that, but the mafia is still a thing right now, isn't it, in the US?
It is and it isn't. So the mafia was basically decimated, right? And then you had 9/11. And then with 9/11, the FBI and the NYPD's focus was terrorism.
Yeah.
So maybe say for argument's sake, I don't know the numbers, but say you had 200 people working on the mafia. Now you got 30.
Yeah.
So now guys are going to slip through the cracks. The RICO statutes, though, I mean, the mobsters are afraid. Because they hit you with these jail sentences and you're doing 30 years. And like we were just talking about earlier about the federal system, you're doing your time in Louisiana. No one's going to come visit you. So the mob still exists, but not on the level that it was. And they're not killing each other anymore because what they figured out was it's bad for business. You start dumping bodies in the street or people start disappearing, brings the cops. So now they're more of banning guys. They call it putting somebody on the shelf, which means you basically excommunicated from the mafia. Get out of here. They chase you. They tell you, all right, you're out. You're done. You know, it's basically you get your privileges taken. Get the fuck out of here.
Well, and I suppose, you know, you look at it and as you say, you know, dead bodies isn't necessarily great for sort of visitors and tourism or all that. And so the less of that, the more people come to the city, the more opportunities there are to then either extort money or to do whatever it is that they're doing, you know. So I suspect that, you know, killing people perhaps isn't the right way. I mean, it's never the right way to go. Obviously, I'll just put that out there. You know, it's never the right way to go. But from a mafia point of view, I suppose, you know, it's actually the more people that we have inside the city, the more people are spending money inside, whether it's their shops or their casinos or their chop shops or whatever it is they're doing. You know, the more opportunity it is that they can then get rich off the back of that. So
no, they make sense. They don't make their money from tourism. The way the mafia makes it, so like my neighborhood, I'll give you an example, like my neighborhood. My neighborhood, the mob made their money from different scams. So first of all, there's always someone that needs money.
Yeah.
So there's loan sharking.
Yeah.
Right. So you lend somebody $500 and they have to pay you $50 a week forever until you give them that $500. So even if you're knocking down that loan, you still got to give them $50 a week until you pay off that $500. So they're making money on loan sharking. Sports betting was tremendous in my neighborhood. Guys would go to the local bookie and bet football, bet baseball, bet the horses. Then you had the illegal numbers. So before New York State or different states had the lottery, you had the illegal lottery in the 5 boroughs. And the illegal lottery was the last, and it was every day, and it was the last 3 digits. And I think it was of the rate, they would pick a racetrack, and it was like the last 3 digits of the attendance of a racetrack. And you could bet, you know, straight, box it, combination. And in poorer neighborhoods, the payoff was bigger than the lottery is now. And you could bet a nickel, a dime, a quarter, and the payouts were bigger. So everything the mob did, the government does now. They're just making money on it with taxes.
Right.
So the mob makes their money that way. The mob, the way people get involved with the mafia is they come to them for a favor, or they unknowingly get involved with a business that's controlled by the mob. So like in my neighborhood, or any neighborhood in the 5 boroughs in New York State for that matter, private sanitation. So if you own a business, the New York City Department of Sanitation is going to pick up your garbage. You have to have a private sanitation company come. Well, they were either owned by the mob or controlled by the mob. So Beans and Gaz can't buy a couple of garbage trucks and start running around undercutting because they're going to start setting your trucks on fire. And then if that doesn't work, they're going to beat you up. And if that doesn't work, you're going for a dirt nap. So there were different businesses that they run and control.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, to be fair, it wouldn't take much to run us out of business, I don't imagine.
No.
Yeah, we'd be pretty good at taking ourselves out of business, I would have thought. So, did you want to share, or can you share a couple of anecdotes then from your book, your new book?
Yeah, sure. There's a chapter in my book about the NYPD's mounted unit. I never worked in the mounted unit. I knew some guys that did. And you go into, the average tourist goes into Manhattan, and you're going to go to Midtown, right? So you're going to go see the Empire State Building, Times Square, and you're going to run into a cop on a horse. Who doesn't love a cop on a horse? And basically what they do is they're a showpiece. People take photos next to them, but they're so important for crowd control during riots, demonstrations, during my time. Now you don't see them anymore during protests. They don't let them do their job. But when I tell you, like at Times Square, when there's like little mini riots going on, when those mounted cops show up with those horses, when those horses turn sideways, people get thrown on their ass. I've seen people, when you get hit with the side of a horse's ass, you're launched like right off your feet and you go, man. I've seen it. So in the late 1970s, early 80s, there was this bar in the Hell's Kitchen section of Manhattan. Now it's been gentrified and you got like a lot of hipster schmucks and Starbucks there. But back in the day, it was a working class Irish neighborhood on the west side of Manhattan. And there was this mounted cop and his horse, and a couple of times a week, he would stop by this Irish pub. And the pub had double wide doors, and the cop would lower his head, and the horse and the cop would come through the bar. And out back, they had like a little beer garden, and the cop would tie up his horse. The locals would give him carrots and shit, and the cop would go to the bar or a booth and have a liquid lunch. Now, NYPD members are prohibited for drink. We've always been prohibited for drinking on duty. But the neighborhood was one of those neighborhoods nobody called the cops on anybody.
I think the weather's got a little bit too bad in Florida.
I'm hoping he hasn't been caught up in a tornado or hurricane or something.
No. One thing we probably should say at the start of this episode, he did warn us that the weather was a little bit worse for where in Florida right now, and they are blowing a wind and a gale. So with a little bit of luck, we'll be able to get him back on the podcast shortly. So Dave, having heard these stories, do you think the police was a missed opportunity for you? Is it something you think you could have done?
Could I have joined the police? I don't know. I don't know actually. Maybe. I don't know. It's very hard to know because I never knew what I wanted to do, I suppose. And it's a bit linear, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could have done Bobby on the beat and stuff. I'd love to think, I suppose, like most people, you think, it'd be great to go in at detective level or to, I say try to solve mass crime and this, that, and the other, and it'd be great. But I don't fancy standing in the middle of a street on a Friday night outside a nightclub, scooping up people's vomit and blood and various other things that coppers seem to do. You know what I mean? So not so sure it would be for me, if I'm honest.
No. To tell you the truth, I actually applied for the police once. It was a few years ago now, maybe 25 years ago. I applied for the police. Yeah, I did, yeah. I certainly got the height for it, but probably not the physique.
Did you fail at the first physical?
I never even got invited, dude. I never even got that far, dude. I got further when I applied for Deal or No Deal.
And Dave Gorman.
I got to meet Dave Gorman, yeah. Yeah, so Well, I've messaged Vic with a little bit to get him back on the podcast. Dave, writing a book. Do you think that's something that you could do then?
Well, just before he answers that, I remember when Dave, back in the day, don't know whether or not he actually did, but he definitely did some sort of writing course. And one of the things that he did say, and I remember him saying, was, I'm doing it because I'd love to write a book. So I'm just wondering how far you got with that and where it went.
I did, actually. It was a writing course. I wrote a book. Took a writing course.
I remember that.
The Writers Bureau, and it was an awful long time ago. But it was quite a lot of money, but it was a no limit on the amount of time that you can take to do it. So I did it for a bit, and then life took over, and it's basically sitting there. And my intention when I finally stop working, or at least stop working full time, is to go back and complete that course and have a go. I mean, it's a bit trite to say everyone's got a book in them, because I don't think that's really true.
Yeah.
But I would definitely have a go. I would complete the course, and I'll definitely have a go at writing one. And I know me and Adam have got a contract between us anyway that if we write, is it role-playing games, those kinds of things, that we got a contract that everything gets split 50-50.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure 50-50 of nothing is still nothing.
It's weird because you always think, if your lucky numbers come in, what would you do? And if you didn't have to work, and I've always said, people say, what would you do? Well, obviously, I'd play a lot of golf, so I'd say I'd play a lot of golf, but I'd write a book. And I was like, oh yeah, what would it be on? I said, I've got absolutely no idea. But it's weird that it's just something that, and go back to the, in our younger days when we were geeking a little bit and stuff, and it was, you have an idea, and then you think, I wonder whether you could turn that into a book. And I've got stuff at home that think I've got no doubt that the storyline, and don't get me wrong, you pinch bits from here or there, just like, J.K. Rowling pinched bits from Tolkien and this, that, and the other and stuff. But, you pinch bits from here or there. But that storyline, in my mind, works.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it works as a book. In my mind, it works as a multi-million-pound blockbuster movie down the line as well, and all of this sort of stuff. You think, I'm sure. Now, have I got the grammatical skills to actually write the book? Probably not. Have I got the concepts in my mind and think character progression, generation, and historical stuff? Yeah, I probably have. So I'd be curious to know from Dave, who maybe has done that course, is that are there people that, if all you need to do is provide the ideas and the storyline, and then do they write around the subject for you, or is that something you have to do all yourself?
We kind of ghost writers, and a lot of celebrities have ghost writers because they don't have the time or the ability to actually write. But what you said there is I think a lot of people, if they have an internal monologue with themselves and you talk a story in your own head, it actually sounds really good. But then if you have an internal monologue in your head and you go through a scene of a story, half a chapter, whatever, and then try and put it onto paper, if you can do that, then you're in a good place. But it's really, really difficult. And I was speaking to Verity at work, as our marketing and sort of journalist person, and she says it's quite common, to have the internal monologue where you can run through a story and it can be exciting, dramatic, and whatever. But the moment you try to write, you can't do it. And even speaking it out, so an internal monologue that you're speaking, try to record it, it just stops. And I'm like that. But she says it's just practice. Yeah. And if you just practice and practice, it will come. But it's not easy. I mean, just try it sometime to run that story that you've got in your head and then just try and write it out. And it's really difficult.
Yeah. Because to me, when you write it out, and I don't want to hark back to, your GCSE English literature days or language days when you have to write this, that, and the other, but it's like actually getting it down on paper where you're thinking, oh, well, that doesn't sound very good, sort of thing. But in your own mind, it sounds mint because you're invested in the concept and you're invested in the story and you know the characters and you understand them. But then actually trying to then explain that. So if I tried to explain it to you guys now, you'd be like, what? So what happens? But in my mind, it's crystal clear what happens. There's a start, there's a middle, there's an end, and this is the story, and away you go. But I suppose getting that down is really, really difficult. I mean, I suppose Vic, in a way, is slightly easier because it's all real life for him. He's lived it, he's breathed it, he's their stories from his life as opposed to it's a fiction sort of thing. So that, and I don't know, is that easier because it's him? He's lived it, he's felt it, he's breathed it.
It will be, but also with Vic, the way he talks is very animated, and
Yeah.
I mean, you heard him talking about a colonoscopy, and it was very dramatic, and the language, and it's very exciting and funny. I talked about an endoscopy, and it was just flat compared to how Vic delivered it. So we're basically talking about the same thing, the same experience. But then Vic talked about my endoscopy, or an endoscopy relating to me, and it was funny and entertaining again. So I think his personality is probably easier to translate onto paper.
Yeah, but then again, it goes into the so therefore, how easy is it if you are naturally outgoing and funny and charismatic? How easy is it then to turn that into on paper, so that when you read it, it still comes across as being funny? Because when Vic and I remember the first couple of times we had him on, I mean, God, we were crying, laughing with some of the stories he was telling us. And don't get me wrong, read some in his story in his book, and they're funny. They're just not as funny as when he recounts them firsthand. And he's a terribly engaging person, and when he's talking, you can't help but listen and be grabbed by him. And I suppose then, so how easy is it then to translate that onto paper? I mean, he's obviously pretty good at it because he's got
a successful
author, absolutely, yeah.
Well, he'll have another story to tell us next time he's back on, and that's how he was guesting on our podcast. Then his power went out, which is what he just messaged to say.
Is that what he said?
Yeah. So as he said at the start, there are storms in Florida at the moment, and hopefully we can get him back on before the end of the podcast. But if not, guess what? We'll try and get him back on in the next couple of weeks. So, because I want to know what happened to that horse.
Yeah, and literally, I was dying to know whether or not he walked up to the bar and said, "Why such a long face?" You know what I mean? I was like, "Hold on, thank you very much." I thought that was where we were going with it. Oh, Dave, you're shaking your head. Did you not like that one?
No, that's just
rubbish. Oh, okay, sorry.
And I bet if you wrote it down and I read it, I still wouldn't laugh.
No, it'd be less funny. It would be less funny. Funnily enough, though, as we're talking about writing books, I am in the process, and I've stalled for about 12 months. I could blame writer's block, but it's probably just laziness. I'm writing a book myself at the moment.
Okay.
So, conversation. So when my cousin Bo was over here in February of, was it 21 that he came? Maybe, yeah, I think it was 21. One of the things he said is what we need to do is that story of me chasing following my ancestry via the family tree and using ancestry.com and what have you. That he says that needs putting into a book, and it's exactly what you guys are saying. I have jotted it down. I've written it out, the linear, the path, the side of it, and stuff like that. And I've noted down a few anecdotes that I found amusing on the way and just different coincidences that I think people could find interesting. But when you put it down on paper and you read it back, it's like, man, it's entertaining to me.
Yeah.
Because I know the story.
Because you live it, you feel it, it's your story. Yeah. And that's the thing I suppose I was trying to get across, and that's why it must be so difficult that, if it's an autobiography and you're telling the story of your own life or your own experiences, it might be slightly easy because you can feel it, but when you're reading it back, you're like, oh, I remember that bit, and that invokes emotion in you because you remember your feeling. Whereas somebody cold like me or Dave reading it, would be like, yeah, that's quite interesting, but meh, sort of thing.
Thanks for that.
That's all right. No worries. I look forward to buying it.
Yeah. Listen, I laughed at Dave when he said about his endoscopy.
It's only because you laughed at the pain he was going through at the time. There's nothing to the procedure.
No, that's true.
But the thing is, you've got to plug away, and you've got to work at it. I think you said that you called yourself lazy, Adam, and that
you'd be right, yeah.
No, that would perhaps be unfair. It's just not easy, and I've listened to a lot of authors talking, and people have different techniques, but a lot of them say that they can only do it by saying, I am going to do X number of words a day, and they schedule time, and it's like a job. They go, they sit at the desk in the office or wherever it is, and they don't leave until they've written that number. And if they don't force themselves to do that on a routine, they can't do it, because you do just, it's like anything. You've got to work at it, and you've got to practice, and you've actually got to do it. And if you just think, I can't think what to write, give up and go down the pub, you're never going to get there, are you?
No, but it must be difficult though if you're doing that and you say to yourself, I mean, I don't know what a realistic word count would be. Would it be 1,000 words a day, a couple of thousand words a day, whatever it may be? I don't know. But there probably is. I mean, obviously, having never written a book, I don't know. But you read about it and you think there probably is something called writer's block in it, and you sit there and you think, right, what do I write? And you think, Christ, I actually physically can't think of how to start it, So if you then put the pressure on yourself to write, you probably write crap, which then means then when it gets to the re-edit and the reword and the rewrite, you're thinking, Christ, I'm just rewriting the whole thing because actually I had writer's block first time round, so therefore, I don't know, you know.
The biggest challenge I'm finding is, so I wrote it and I've got into it. It was like, I'm literally about halfway through the story and I've basically got a pamphlet at this stage. You know what I mean? It's not big enough to be a book. And I do think the story is big enough to be a book. So then Bo said, well, really what you want to do is you want to start it off like this. Take people back to the Second World War. Take them back to like when our grandparents met, you know, try and add a little bit of colour to that, paint that picture. It's like, oh, do you know what? There's a really good way of doing it. And then he's, you know, so I tried that and I'm rewriting bits as I'm going. And then all of a sudden, the rest of it seems entirely disjointed.
But you go back to writing about the war and the family history, and that's it. You would find that more difficult because even though it's your family, you're detached from that because you haven't lived that. And the bits that you start writing about the bits that you did, and you think, well, the first time that you logged onto Ancestry, and then the first time that you got the email saying we have a connection, you're like, oh my god, and like that jolt of excitement. You think, but that's you. You've lived and breathed that, and you know the story that I have in my mind. It's a fiction one, and it's probably 4 or 5 sides of A4, but there's no. That's literally just a storyline. So you think, that, you know, there's cities named in there, there's characters named in there, there's places named in there, there's events. But it's literally just almost like, well, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens. There's no development. There's no weaving of the story. It's just like this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And now I've got like 4 or 5 pages, and that's it. Yeah. You know, so to delve into this, so when you mention a story, then writing 2 or 3 pages about that place or about that inn or tavern or whatever, that's the difficult bit. It's the fleshing out bits, but still make it interesting that people then want to read.
Is your book set in the last inn?
No. That would be quite cool, but no. And look, it is a I suppose you'd call it a sword and sorcery story. It's not based in Middle Earth. It's not based on Tolkien. It's similar type of character and similar genre, but it's not based there. But it literally is like this and then this and then this and then this. And years and years and years ago, we possibly would have done it as an RPG sort of thing. But in my mind, it's a whole story.
Yeah. But if you bring me and Dave in it, we do get equal rights, just for the record.
Oh, is it? So we're now thirds, is that? So we're not 50-50. Well, oh, so you get 50-50 on yours and I'm excluded, whereas if I bring you in, it's now a third. Is that how it works?
But again, it's 50-50 or nothing. It's the same as the nothing that you'll get. You'll be fine. You ain't missing out. And yeah, so just to fill people in there, so going way back to when we were probably about 16 or 17, we had this fanciful idea of writing a role-playing game, didn't we? And we had, was it Mrs. Gunter, our politics teacher, oversaw us?
It was.
And actually, you know, to legalise or notarise, I should say, the document where we agreed that we would go 50-50 on this stupid idea called Quasar.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah. Have you got the notes for that anyway, Dave?
I've got the agreement.
There isn't anymore, I don't imagine. I don't know. Is it popular? Well, it's Storms in Church Lawn now.
Yeah. So I think he said then he got the agreement, but I don't think he's got the actual game itself that he developed. But no, I think it's hard, isn't it? It's difficult because it's one of those things you'd like to think you could do, but you probably couldn't, and it'd be really frustrating because you think, God, there's a story in there somewhere, but you probably just couldn't write it the way that you would want it written. No. And that must be really difficult for a storyteller that thinks they have the story in their mind and they have to generate, but writing it on paper, it just doesn't come across that well. So it must be really frustrating. No,
yeah, it must, absolutely. And one thing I think with Vic as well, with his stories, like I say, they're short stories, so that they're short and they're punchy. So you've got that, the great, I would call them toilet books. You can sit them by the side of the loo and you can sit there and read them, and
they're almost like little anecdotes, aren't they? They're sort of they are stories, but they're just like little anecdotes. It's like, oh, I remember the time when this happened, and then this guy said this, and everybody's laughing, and then that's it, and then that's the end, and then he gets banged up for 25 years or whatever. It's like, oh, brilliant, I mean, the story told on one of the first time we had him on, and he's talking about like pulling over a car that had been hijacked, and like 2 nuns get out. So how the hell did 2 nuns hijack a car and stuff? And he's just like. The guy that fell down the stairs and what did they call him, Blue something or whatever. It's like, why did you call him that? Because he basically got whacked by some hitman and they had blue paint poured down his throat. You're like, oh, Christ, like all these stories. But to him, I mean, he's retelling them. I mean, you were crying, weren't we? The first, literally, like crying, laughing. Yeah. But for him, that's just real life. That's what he did. They were his experiences working in the job that he worked at. And, God bless him. He's found a niche for writing them, and he's obviously very, very successful in that. So, fair play to him. But yeah, I think living the experience and then writing about that, it would potentially be easier. I just haven't really lived enough doing the right things to write a book about it, I suppose.
That's it. He has lived a life, and it's a life. If you're tuning in now to the live stream and I'm hoping to hear more of Vic Ferrari, I'm afraid there's storms in Florida, and 2024, could it be the cursed year for Tallboy Radio? Let's find out. But hopefully we'll get him back on in a week or two's time, and he can finish that anecdote about the horse in the bar. Although Gaz had just finished it for him. So, given that it's we're nearly around about the hour mark, should we call time on this episode? It's quite a good reference there, given the horse in the bar.
Absolutely.
And we'll start horsing around. And Gaz, did you want to say your goodbyes to our listeners who've been kind enough to stay for us rambling nonsense?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to you guys who probably tuned in for the last 10, 15 minutes thinking you're going to get the last bit of Vic. And it's been myself, Beans, and Dave. But look, Vic is a really engaging person. We loved having him on. I would love to have him on again, obviously, so he can finish the stories that he was about to talk to us about his new book. So really enjoyed the episode. It's a shame that the storms in Florida sort of unfortunately took their toll on his power and all of that, but it leaves it open for him to return again. So we look forward to that whenever that may be. Vic, if you do listen to this back, stay safe, brother. Hope everything is okay, and health is the main thing. So hope you're safe and keep well.
Amen. Dave.
I'm sure Vic would say this, and Adam may have been wrapping up with it, but his latest book, Laughing in the Line of Duty, available on Amazon with all these other books. They don't cost a load of money. They're a good little read, as we've just been saying. They're full of little anecdotes that make you smile, that make you laugh, maybe, and it gives a little insight to the NYPD that he was part of. Vic was part of back those years when he worked there. So definitely worth a read. And if there's any authors out there, get in touch, because it'd be good to get an author on the program rather than us talking about how it must be impossible, it's too difficult, we've got no idea how to do it. Let's get somebody on that does.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because actually I'm going to throw a name out there, and he was an illustrator stroke. So you got Bucky. So I wonder whether or not we can get Bucky, who has he's done some children's books. He's a published author. So whether or not you look at him, see if we get him on, see how easy it is.
100%. And we've had other published authors on there. Joyce Matthews of the Scottish Alchemist,
absolutely,
has published 10 books herself. So you know what I mean.
Well, there's always an excuse to get the Scottish Alchemist on, so maybe get her on, and instead of talking about Jim, we'll talk about the book she's written. That sounds like a hoot.
Yeah, absolutely. But as Dave said, and although, like I say, Dave brought his usual sense of fun to it, made it sound like a eulogy. Like, if you head over to Vic's page on Amazon, search out Vic Ferrari, and you can find his books. I bought pretty much all of them, and they are fantastic. And I'm just reading this current one at the moment. Absolutely fabulous, hilarious stories. He'll tell you that the great stock and stuff has cost around about $10, but the great news for us is the exchange rate. So we get it for less than 10. So it's about $7.99 a book, and well worth picking up. And we can tell him that ourselves the next time that we get him on the podcast. So I will wish you all a fond farewell. And next week we will be back with Holiday with the Heathers, a couple who share their travel stories on YouTube. Have a look for them in the meantime. I can tell you they are fantastic. And we'll catch you all next week. So we will say so long for now and take care, especially for yourself if you find yourself in Florida and the weather ain't so good.